I now give the floor to His Excellency Jean-Claude Gakosso, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Cooperation and Congolese abroad of the Congo.
Monsieur le Président.
President of the General Assembly, heads of delegations, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies. The United Nations, and I don't need to recall this fact, has a vocation to lead peoples throughout the world towards collective well-being and prosperity, towards justice, peace, security, and development, in line with its charter. The United Nations remains, after all, the only organization that can bring together all of the nations for an effective collective action so as to mitigate the consequences of various and varied scourges which can destabilize whole swaths of humanity, if not the entire humankind. Even during its most difficult time in our common history, the United Nations has always held high the flame of universal solidarity. The organization has always managed to mobilize international community as it was looking for lasting solutions when faced with collective danger. And this is precisely why my country, the Republic of the Congo, has very deep faith and trust in the organization with such a unique historic trajectory. Unfortunately, we are compelled to acknowledge that despite its praiseworthy commitment to peace throughout the world, despite its tireless advocacy for the well-being of many, every year millions of people continue dying of hunger in the world. And for lack of medication, millions of others continue dying from perfectly curable diseases such as typhoid and malaria. And today, we are talking about billions of people who do not have the vaccine so as to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, the pandemic which will certainly leave an indelible mark on our century, a pandemic which is a fearful common enemy, an enemy, a foe against whom we have to pool our intelligence and our forces. And it is only by standing shoulder to shoulder that we will be able to overcome the virus which threatens the very existence of human life. And as I say this, I have a very special thought for the inhabitants of this wonderful city of New York who are hosting us today and who have suffered from it so much. In my country, ladies and gentlemen, the moment the first COVID cases appeared, the government has very vigorously taken the bull by the horns, and to date, the government has fully vaccinated about 180,000 people, which is about 5.1% of the population. This is an opportunity we would like to use in order to thank all of the friendly countries, all of the technical and financial partners who have facilitated the access of my country to vaccines through direct donations and under various initiatives such as COVAX and AVAT, for example. Mr. President, 6 years ago, in 2015, in this very hall, we were overtaken by a common impetus of solidarity and decided to include the fight against poverty and the promotion of health for everyone amongst our main challenges that we need to tackle. And we have committed ourselves to work together so as to intensify the education extended to the most disadvantaged throughout the world. The Sustainable Development Goals that we adopted at that time are, therefore, the basis for an integral development for all of the peoples throughout the world, with the noble ambition of making sure that no one is left behind. Unfortunately, the gaps between the rich and poor countries have only become wider. In many of the regions in the world, the impossible inequalities have come to compound poverty. And this, a genuine challenge, the kind of challenge that impacts the very credibility of the United Nations throughout the world. Mr. President, the government of the Republic of the Congo welcomes the return of the United States to the Paris Agreement, which is a major tool bringing together the international community to the fight against the imbalances linked to climate change. Within the framework of the implementation of Resolution 75/217 on protecting the global climate for the present and future generations, my country has managed significant progress whilst placing special emphasis on adaptation. Scientific studies are being conducted which study the vulnerability of forest and fragile ecosystems, on the practice of agriculture in the savanna, on erosions and cyclic floods. And these studies are conducted to provide specific responses to the challenge of climate change, to strengthen the capacities for adaptation and resilience of the local populations, given the environmental changes which we have seen rapidly increase. When it comes to preserving biodiversity, my country, last February, launched an initiative which we called Biodev 2030, an initiative whose goal is to encourage joint funding, private sector and civil society, towards projects that have to do with preserving biodiversity. Furthermore, the Republic of the Congo reiterates now his appeal to various development partners to invest significantly in lasting funding and to invest in the smart management of the peat bogs in the basin of the Congo, and whose bedrock, according to the scientists, could sequester several thousand tons of carbon. Mr. President, for many years, Africa has been trying to make its voice heard so as to rectify what everyone agrees is a historic injustice vis-à-vis that part of the world. The reappearance of conflicts on the continent calls for better international governance, now more so than ever. In fact, how can we regulate within the United Nations, the Security Council, various crises and conflicts in Africa without effective participation of the selfsame continent where more than 60% of peacekeeping operations take place? It would seem to me that there is somewhat of an inconsistency and an anachronism here, which we need to address. And that is why it seems essential to us that African concerns need to be taken up, the concerns expressed through the Sirte Declaration and the historic Eswatini Consensus, to which we remain firmly attached. Africa is today a major actor throughout the world, and it needs to take pride of place with everything that this implies in terms of rights and obligations. It needs to take its place within a reformed Security Council, the kind of council that obviously we want to make sure is more transparent, more dynamic, more democratic, and more clearly representative of the wonderful diversity of our world. Mr. President, the anachronism that I was just referring to when I was talking about the African claim to a seat on the Security Council, this anachronism tallies very well with the embargo situation imposed on Cuba, the embargo which has been lasting for so many years and which inflicted terrible suffering on the people of that country. In fact, it is long past time that the embargo needs to be lifted. And once again, from this high tribute, we call for wisdom and tolerance of the American leaders, especially those who are of the current generation, who most of them have nothing to do with this remnant of the Cold War. Mr. President, amongst the challenges that the international community is facing today, we have the Libyan crisis featuring prominently. In the course of the recent months, considerable advances have been made in this regard, thanks to the pooled efforts by the United Nations, the African Union, the European Union, the Arab League, the neighboring states, and other goodwill entities. The efforts were boosted, if I may say so, by the Berlin process, which has created a new impetus as we're all looking for a solution to this crisis. But in order to make sure that the general elections planned for the upcoming months take place, the elections that are awaited as a turning point in the history of this country, for this, all of the stakeholders need to be looking in the same direction, and they need to continue persevering with implementing the decisions that came out of Berlin, the decisions which were regularly monitored and followed up in Munich, in Geneva, in Cairo, in Tunis, in Oyo, in Algiers, and even here in New York a few days ago. These decisions essentially concern the following: consolidating the ceasefire, respecting the arms embargo, unifying the military and financial institutions, gradual withdrawal based on consensus and balanced of foreign combatants, and doing this obviously without any prejudice to neighboring countries. For the African Union High-Level Committee on Libya, which President Denis Sassou Nguesso chairs, and it is my honor to be speaking to you on his behalf now and here. According to the High-Level Committee, there should be no ambiguity on these points. The African Union High-Level Committee considers that as we're moving towards the dates of elections, the Libyans have to deepen the dialogue amongst themselves, and they have to transcend the bitterness accumulated and learn to forgive each other. They have to break down the sectarian barriers that sometimes keep them captured, and they have to establish everywhere bridges and gangways between the tribes, customary authorities, and religious leaders. It is only this way, we think, that a definitive chance can be given to peace and a new historic perspective could be opened for their country. For its part, and in line with the Pan-African convictions, President Denis Sassou Nguesso reiterates through me his commitment to continue with his mission at the head of the African Union High-Level Committee on Libya. He reiterates his commitment to accompany all the way our Libyan brothers, all the way down the pathway of inclusive dialogue, national reconciliation, and the reconstruction of their beautiful country. Mr. President, to conclude, I would like to say that I rejoiced this will that we have, the humble servants of our nations, from generation to generation since 1945. I welcome this very strong will that we have always had and shared within this forum of global responsibility. It's renewed every time at this high tribune when we say that we are going to work towards humanity which is more generous and stands shoulder to shoulder. Reaffirmed every time to work for a world of peace and justice, a world of freedom and equality, a world where, ladies and gentlemen, prosperity genuinely, truly has to be shared amongst all the nations. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Cooperation and Congolese Abroad of the Congo for his statement.